Have you ever trusted someone, only to find out it was all an illusion? Have you ever believed in promises, speeches, or smiles, only to realize too late that you were being deceived? Machiavelli understood this better than anyone. He didn't write to please. He wrote to expose how power really works. In this video, you'll learn how to see through the masks. You'll understand why so many people keep getting manipulated, and how you can stop being fooled for good. This is a philosophical guide inspired by Machiavelli, not to make you cynical, but to make you clear-headed. Understanding human nature isn't just a philosophical exercise, it's a practical necessity. Machiavelli warns us, humans are largely driven by appearances, emotions, and immediate self-interest. They rarely see the essence of an action. They focus on what's on the surface, what's easy to see. That's one of the keys to not being deceived, because deception doesn't usually start with a direct lie. It starts with a well-crafted appearance. People tend to trust those who look confident more than those who actually are. They follow those who appear strong, even if it's just an illusion. Human nature isn't idealistic. It's a web of instincts, self-preservation, and a general laziness to think critically. That makes us vulnerable. Machiavelli wrote this in the 1500s, but it feels incredibly relevant today. Look at how public figures are still judged more by their social media image than by their real actions. A polished speech and a charming face are often enough to win people over. Few take the time to dig deeper. That's not just an individual flaw. It's a structural part of how the human mind works. Even Aristotle, 1,000 years before Machiavelli, called humans zoon politikon, political or social animals, but admitted that reason doesn't always rule our impulses. Even when we seek justice, we're still led by passions, interests, and fear. Machiavelli strips away any romanticism. He says, if you understand people, you'll see their loyalty can be bought. Their morality is flexible, and their judgment rarely runs deep. So what does that mean for you? That blindly trusting how someone seems is the first step toward being manipulated. That assuming everyone acts with good intentions or shares your values is a dangerous mistake. Recognizing the instability of human nature is, paradoxically, the path to more realistic and clear-headed relationships. But careful, Machiavelli isn't saying everyone is bad. What he's saying is that everyone has the potential for self-interest, and that self-interest usually outweighs virtue when the opportunity arises. People can be loyal, but only if they have a reason. They can be fair, unless fairness comes at a personal cost. They can even be kind, but usually only when it doesn't threaten their security or power. We often idealize others. We expect consistency, gratitude, loyalty, but the truth is, those things usually stick around only as long as they're useful to the person offering them. The real mistake is projecting your own intentions onto others, as if everyone operates by the same internal code. Machiavelli's lesson is clear. Those who understand how unpredictable the human soul can be are better prepared to anticipate behavior, avoid disappointment, and protect themselves from traps. In The Prince, Machiavelli says that to lead, you first need to understand people as they really are, not as you wish they were. This raw, unfiltered view gives leaders and regular people the ability to deal with the real world, not an idealized one. And that's one of the strongest defenses against being fooled. Think about how many times someone approached you with kind words, sweet gestures, a genuine smile, only to later reveal hidden agendas. That doesn't mean we should become paranoid. It means we should learn to see beyond the surface, watch people's actions, look for consistency, notice how they behave under pressure. What someone does when there's nothing to gain says more than what they say when they're seeking approval. Modern philosopher Thomas Hobbes had a similar view. He believed that in their natural state, humans are in constant competition, and society only works because we fear death, not because we love each other. In other words, civilized life is a deal based on mutual interest, not spontaneous brotherhood. This helps explain why relationships and societies hold together, and why they fall apart when interest disappears. So, Understanding human nature is an antidote to naivety. It means accepting that people aren't moral heroes. They calculate, adapt, fake, retreat, and advance depending on the situation. That's why, as Machiavelli says, you shouldn't judge just by what people say or by their looks. Judge by what they do, by actions, consequences, real outcomes. Learning this doesn't make you cold. It makes you aware. The more you understand human nature, the more freedom you have to navigate it intelligently. You'll make better choices about who to trust, who to team up with, and who to protect yourself from. You'll start to notice patterns in what's left unsaid, in rehearsed gestures, in empty promises. And that's one of the most powerful tools against deception. Not expecting perfection from others, but also not letting blind suspicion rule your life. The balance is in observing carefully, always asking, what does this person gain from this? And acting based on evidence, not just emotions. In short, humans are fickle. They're driven by self-interest. They judge by appearances. But you don't have to be a victim of that. You can learn to see deeper. And the more you recognize these patterns, the less you'll be fooled. Most importantly, you'll become more capable of acting with clarity, even in the middle of chaos. We live in a time when image is everything. On social media, in public speeches, and even in everyday interactions, looking ethical and kind has become almost more important than being that way. But Machiavelli gives us a warning that's both uncomfortable and deeply true. The virtue we see may just be a mask, and behind that mask, some of the most dangerous vices can be hiding. This is one of the most unsettling lessons from his work, but maybe also one of the most important for anyone trying to survive and thrive in a world where the game of power is silent and disguised. The Florentine thinker says, it's not enough for a leader to be virtuous. They must appear virtuous. And when necessary, they must be ready to act with cunning, toughness, or even cruelty if the situation demands it. And here's the key idea. For Machiavelli, virtue isn't about unconditional morality. It's about effectiveness. It's knowing when to be good and when not to be. It's acting according to what the moment calls for, not based on rigid moral rules. That doesn't mean being evil by nature. It means understanding that blind kindness can invite manipulation, while the appearance of virtue can be used as a shield or even a weapon. How many times in history have people who seemed untouchable and honest turned out to be ruthless and power-hungry? Leaders with sweet speeches about justice, equality, and compassion. But behind closed doors, their decisions were driven by selfish motives or thirst for control. This gap between image and intention is the perfect environment for manipulation. And that's exactly what Machiavelli wants us to see clearly. He didn't write The Prince as a guide to be loved, but as a manual for holding on to power in a world where people, as we saw in the previous lesson, are fickle and self-interested. In a world like this, good intentions aren't enough. You need strategy. And one of the most common strategies? Faking virtue. Just look at what often happens in corporate, political, or even religious spaces. Passionate speeches about ethics, empathy, and compassion, while behind the scenes, decisions are being made that harm others, exclude people, and benefit only a few. Public virtue becomes a performance, a staged show designed to gain support, deflect suspicion, and eliminate competition. And Machiavelli doesn't just describe this, he teaches how to do it. For him, a ruler should learn from animals, be as cunning as a fox and as strong as a lion. To be only virtuous is to be a sheep among wolves. But to appear virtuous, while acting with intelligence, strength, and even immorality when needed, is a powerful tool. That might sound cynical at first. Many philosophers criticize Machiavelli for this. Kant, for example, believed that morality should never be used as a tool, that the right action is the one based on duty, not results. But Machiavelli is focused on the real world, not the ideal one. And in the real world, he says, those who fail to see the game behind appearances will always be outplayed by those who do. This suspicion of virtue on display was also shared by modern thinkers like Nietzsche. He believed that traditional morality often masks a hidden will to power. People who call themselves humble, pure, or selfless might actually be exercising a quiet form of control over others, using virtue as a way to dominate. What looks like kindness is often disguised resentment. What looks like self-denial is actually strategy. And in everyday life, how many times have you seen someone use goodness as a way to manipulate emotions, to play the victim and shut down criticism, to appear trustworthy so they can take advantage of someone's trust? The problem isn't virtue itself, it's when it's used as a cover for deception. Here's the double lesson. Don't blindly trust people who go out of their way to look virtuous. And don't be naive enough to think every good act is truly selfless. Always ask yourself, who benefits from this image? What is this virtue covering up? What are the real actions behind the speech? True virtue doesn't need to be loudly advertised. It's quiet, consistent, and real. Virtue used as a disguise, though, is loud, theatrical, and used as a bargaining chip. And if you don't want to be fooled, you need to learn to tell the difference. That takes time, attention, and above all, paying close attention to contradictions between words and actions. Machiavelli teaches that if you want to survive in this world, you have to learn how to spot fake virtue, and if needed, know how to use the appearance of virtue yourself. This isn't an invitation to hypocrisy, it's a call for realism. It's the awareness that the game of power is almost never played out in the open. This is one of Machiavelli's most valuable political insights. It forces us to step out of our moral comfort zone and face what really happens in human relationships. It pushes us to let go of idealism and face the complexity of people's actions and intentions. So, next time you meet someone who seems too perfect, take a step back and reflect. No one is all light, and the ones who go out of their way to hide their shadow might just be hiding the one thing you really need to see. This might be one of Machiavelli's most unsettling ideas, but also one of the smartest when it comes to the psychology of power. It's not about being cruel for no reason, it's about deeply understanding how people react to pain and reward, to harm and kindness. Let's be honest, when someone hurts us, we remember it fast and vividly. The resentment kicks in immediately, and forgiveness, if it ever comes, is slow. But when someone helps us, the feeling of gratitude tends to fade quickly. It's fragile, short-lived, and easy to forget. Machiavelli understood this emotional dynamic with surgical precision. That's why he advises, if you need to cause harm, do it quickly, clearly, and decisively. But if you want to win hearts, do good in small, steady steps, like leaving breadcrumbs that keep others grateful and always wanting more. This isn't just a political strategy, it's deeply psychological. When harm is delivered all at once, the impact is strong, but temporary. The pain hits hard, but then it stabilizes. So if tough decisions like cuts, firings, or unpopular actions are necessary, they should happen in a single blow. People are less resentful when the wound is one time, even if it's deep. But when suffering is dragged out day after day, it creates emotional exhaustion, and resentment builds. On the other hand, good deeds work differently. If you give everything at once, praise, promotions, gifts, gratitude flares up and then vanishes. People quickly get used to comfort. What feels generous today becomes expected tomorrow. That's why giving should be slow and intentional. It creates anticipation. It keeps people feeling appreciated and hopeful. Each small gesture feels like an earned reward, and the sense of gratitude stays fresh. Machiavelli isn't telling us to be cruel. He's telling us that if we must do harm, it should be effective. And if we want to do good, we should do it wisely. The goal isn't to cause pain, but to manage human emotion when it comes to influence, leadership, and control. This logic still applies today, often without people realizing it. Governments, companies, and leaders who understand this rhythm act strategically. Major unpopular reforms, if necessary, are usually done at the beginning of a term. One hit. Then comes damage control. Small benefits, bonuses, promises, improvements, delivered gradually. Aristotle, though a defender of moral virtue, also recognized that phronesis, practical wisdom, requires adapting to reality. In that sense, Machiavelli takes this idea to the extreme. If you want stability, you need to control the timing of pain and pleasure, not for morality's sake, but for effectiveness. And for him, that's the real art of leadership. But let's step away from politics for a moment. Think about personal relationships. How many times has a drawn-out breakup, with back and forths and mixed signals, caused more hurt than a clean, honest ending? Or when you tried to soften bad news, only to make it more confusing and painful? Now compare that to times when someone treated you kindly, not with big, flashy acts, but with consistent, thoughtful actions over time. That steady care builds far more trust than a one-time surprise. This idea also helps explain why many leaders fail. Some try too hard to please, giving everything up front, and then have nothing left to offer. Others stretch out harm over time, creating an ongoing atmosphere of fear and uncertainty. Machiavelli's insight. The damage should be sharp and short, the kindness slow and steady. Nietzsche, though coming from a different angle, also wrote about how emotions are used to control people. He believed Christian morality created a culture of ongoing guilt as a form of domination. Machiavelli instead suggests an efficient way of managing harm, not to control through guilt, but to maintain power with intelligence. Is it hard to accept this idea? Absolutely. It clashes with our romantic ideals of justice and goodness. But we're not talking about ideals here. We're talking about how the world really works. And in that regard, Machiavelli is unmatched. He doesn't sugarcoat reality. He lays it bare. You don't have to be a ruler or a strategist to apply this lesson. Just being aware of how the timing of harm and kindness affects others can help. In negotiations, in managing people, even in parenting. What matters is realizing that how you do something is just as important as what you do. So remember, if you have to disappoint someone, do it clearly and all at once. Don't drag it out. Give the other person time to process and move on. And if you want to build trust or show appreciation, take your time. Surprise them. Let each kind act feel meaningful. This is one of the most subtle forms of practical wisdom. Yes, it's a power tactic, but it's also an art of living with others. Because, as Machiavelli might say, living among people takes more than virtue. It takes understanding human emotions, knowing when to act, and above all, staying clear-headed enough to lead with strength when needed, and kindness when possible. We live in a time when facts alone are no longer enough. Truth, no matter how objective it seems, often holds less power than the version of the truth people choose to believe. And this isn't a modern discovery. Machiavelli realized centuries ago that whoever shapes the narrative shapes the reality of others, and in doing so, holds power over them. The core idea is simple but powerful. It's not what you do that defines your influence, but how people perceive what you do. In The Prince, Machiavelli warns that a ruler must always be aware of his public image. He can act with cruelty, deception, even lies, as long as he knows how to build a narrative that justifies his actions, softens his appearance, and keeps his authority intact. Politics, above all, is theatre, and the most important stage is public opinion. Machiavelli understood that people don't judge essence, they judge appearances. And whoever controls appearances controls judgment. That's why real power often lies not in the sword, but in the story. Not in brute force, but in the version of reality people accept. This lesson is more relevant today than ever. Think about social media. Who has the most influence? The one with the most knowledge? Or the one who knows how to tell their story best? The one who screams the truth? Or the one who wraps an idea in emotion, aesthetics, and a sense of coherence? We live in a war of narratives, and those who don't understand this are doomed to be manipulated by those who do. Machiavelli isn't advocating for lying. He's showing that social reality is shaped by perception, and those who understand this have a massive advantage over those who cling only to raw facts. Because facts are always interpreted, and every interpretation is a narrative. Whoever controls that narrative controls how others see the world. This logic applies to politics, media, corporations, and also to personal relationships. Have you ever noticed how some people can completely shift the direction of a conversation just by controlling how the story is told? A mistake becomes a misunderstanding. An attack becomes a reaction. A betrayal is repackaged as a necessary choice. And people often applaud because they bought the story. And there's nothing more powerful than a well-told story. Plato, in the Republic, warned us that the masses are moved by shadows, images projected on the wall of the cave. Machiavelli, centuries later, updated that idea for the language of power. If people live in the cave of perception, then whoever controls the light projecting the shadows controls their senses. Controlling your image isn't just a side tactic, it's a structural necessity if you want to keep authority. And by image, we don't just mean appearance but reputation, moral narrative, and symbolism. A ruler can be harsh, but if he builds an image of justice, he'll be admired. He can be ruthless, but if he seems protective, he'll be followed. Machiavelli understood that people judge based on symbols, not technical details. And the most powerful symbol is the story you tell. There's also a key psychological truth here. People hate a vacuum. When there are gaps in information, they fill them with stories. And those stories aren't always true, but they feel necessary to the human mind. That's why, if you don't tell your version, someone else will, and it probably won't favor you. So, this lesson demands that you be proactive in crafting your own narrative. Whether you're a leader, an entrepreneur, a teacher, or just someone trying to earn respect, you need to know how others are seeing you. The real question isn't just what am I doing, but how is this being interpreted? Because it's through the eyes of others that your social reality is built. But there's a risk, and Machiavelli knew it. Your image can't drift too far from reality, or it collapses. The story you tell has to feel believable. It needs real elements, concrete actions, symbols the public recognizes as plausible. If not, the illusion breaks, and your reputation can fall as fast as it rose. That's why controlling the narrative requires constant attention and symbolic consistency. Nietzsche would say there are no truths, only interpretations. Machiavelli, being more pragmatic, would respond, then learn to offer the most convincing interpretation. Because in the end, the version that survives is the one that reaches the right ears at the right time. This doesn't mean you have to be fake. It means you have to be aware. Every action says something, even silence, a gesture, your clothes, the timing of when you speak or stay quiet. Everything is part of the narrative. And if you don't master this symbolic language, it will speak for you. A classic example is Julius Caesar. He knew that his authority came not just from military victories, but from how those victories were told back in Rome. His achievements came with short, effective phrases and skillful propaganda. Veni, vidi, vici, I came, I saw, I conquered, isn't just a statement. It's the construction of a myth. And as Machiavelli knew, a myth is more powerful than a sword. In short, whoever controls the narrative doesn't just influence, they dominate. And if you don't want to be deceived in this game, you need to learn how to see past the words. Hear what's left unsaid. Notice the difference between reality and the official version of reality. And more importantly, you need to learn to tell your story. Because as George Orwell once said, who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. The narrative is the invisible battlefield where power is won, and ignoring that is putting yourself at the mercy of those who master this art. Machiavelli knew, maybe better than any other political thinker, that public approval is a fragile currency. It has value, yes, but it shifts with the wind. A leader who relies only on public praise is building on shaky ground, vulnerable to sudden collapse. The people, that mass of collective desires, frustrations, and hopes, play a key role in maintaining power. But their mood is unpredictable. Their loyalty can shift based on a rumor, a fear, or the latest promise. The wise ruler, Machiavelli teaches, should win public support, but never rely on it alone. Real stability takes more than applause. It takes a solid foundation. And what is that foundation? According to Machiavelli, it's a network of institutional support, strategic alliances, control over force, and a reputation built over time. Without that, the leader becomes a hostage to public opinion. And like all emotions, public opinion can be warm today and hostile tomorrow. This truth goes far beyond politics. It applies to everyday life. How many people live chasing approval, trying to keep everyone happy, but at the first mistake, they're judged, abandoned, and forgotten? That's because acceptance based only on fleeting emotions never lasts. Machiavelli invites us to recognize this instability and not be fooled by temporary applause. The Roman philosopher Seneca, long before Machiavelli, warned, "He who lives to please others will always be unstable." Wisdom lies in earning respect, not just likability. Respect is quieter, but far more durable. While people may fall for appearances, they stay loyal only to those who offer consistency and security over time. This is clear in modern politics. How many leaders rise quickly on waves of public approval, only to fall just as fast because they failed to build real support structures? Charisma may open doors, but it doesn't keep them open. And popular favor, if not backed by real results, quickly turns into overwhelming pressure. Machiavelli saw this happen often in the Italian cities of his time. Princes who entertained the people with parties, promises, and giveaways. But when crisis hit, their popularity vanished like smoke. The public acts like a single body, but a body without memory is always ready to worship someone new. Philosopher Hannah Arendt, analyzing 20th century totalitarian regimes, made a powerful observation. Power based purely on emotional crowds is unstable because it lacks institutional legitimacy. To her, lasting power comes from trust built between leaders and society, not from manipulating mass emotions. This difference is key. Machiavelli knew the crowd must be won over, but he also warned, any ruler who wants to endure must be prepared for the moment when the people turn. And that means building strong alliances, carefully managing reputation, and holding real tools of power. Otherwise, you're just a slave to your image. This same lesson applies to everyday life. Those who depend too much on outside validation end up living for others' approval and lose their own center. Popularity, like public love, is conditional. It lasts as long as you keep people satisfied. One mistake can turn it all into criticism or abandonment. That's why Machiavelli calls us to be clear-eyed. It's not about dismissing the people, it's about understanding them. A good leader should seek public support, but while building a fortress in the background, while forging alliances, while planting roots. That way, when the winds of opinion shift, you won't be swept away with them. And that's one of the keys to not being deceived. Many times we trust someone just because others are clapping. But popularity doesn't mean virtue or competence. What's praised today can be rejected tomorrow. Real authority isn't measured by followers, but by the strength of the foundation beneath it. Machiavelli knew that leading is like walking on a tightrope, and the crowd, no matter how big or powerful it seems, is fickle. History proves it. Kings overthrown by uprisings, dictators once idolized then condemned. Yesterday's heroes become today's villains. And often, it's all based on perception, not truth. Arendt added that this shift becomes even more dangerous when institutions collapse and people no longer trust anything. That's when the worst kinds of leaders emerge, the ones who feed on fear and raw emotion. Machiavelli, being more pragmatic, doesn't fear emotion. but insists that leaders must control it, not be ruled by it. So, if you're in a position of leadership, or simply want to protect yourself from power games, learn to spot when the support you're getting is just temporary. Ask yourself, is my position built on the excitement of the moment, or on solid structures that can survive a shift in the crowd's mood? Winning over the public is necessary, but staying in power with wisdom, without relying on the whim of the masses, that's what separates those who last from those who simply shine for a moment. Politics, and really all relationships involving power, aren't built on open truths. They're built in what's left unsaid, in the silence, in the ambiguity. Machiavelli didn't just notice this, he embraced it. To him, politics isn't ruled by honesty, but by disguise. And if you don't learn to decode it, you'll be fooled or crushed. This might sound cynical, and maybe it is, but it comes from watching centuries of betrayals, broken alliances, and sweet words that hid sharp knives. In The Prince, Machiavelli warns that many rulers lost everything because they believed too much in allies' promises, loud declarations, and convenient deals. Because in the world of power, words are often masks, not mirrors of true intention. Telling the truth in politics can be an act of bravery, but blindly trusting someone else's truth is just naive. The real strategist, whether a leader or an everyday citizen, understands that behind every statement there's an interest, a strategy, a goal. Not always malicious, but almost always calculated. That's why learning to read between the lines is essential if you don't want to be manipulated. Politics, at its core, is the space where people say one thing to get something else, where silence protects power, where what's left out is often more important than what's said. And that's not a flaw, that's how the game works. Machiavelli called this virtue, the ability to act according to what the situation demands, with flexibility, intelligence, and when needed, deception. A leader shouldn't be transparent like glass, but more like a mirror, reflecting only what's useful to show. At the same time, that leader needs sharp eyes to see through others' words, to pick up on the hidden signs of betrayal or political shifts. Philosopher Michel Foucault adds another layer to this. In his studies of power, he shows how language itself is a tool of control. We don't just speak to share information, we speak to guide, to protect, to win in a symbolic game. Power is built into speech, and learning how it works helps us avoid its traps. This applies far beyond politics, even in personal relationships. There's always something left unsaid, and usually what's left unsaid is more important than what is said. A leader, or even just a conscious individual, must learn to pick up on what's hidden, to hear what wasn't spoken, to read the subtext. How often is a promise made just to calm someone, not to be kept? How many alliances sound loyal but hide temporary interests? How often is a political yes just a delayed no? Machiavelli isn't encouraging paranoia. He's encouraging awareness. He's reminding us how complex human relationships become when power is involved. Politics, he says, is like theatre. Everyone's playing a part. The real question is, are you the writer, or just a background character in someone else's story? And this isn't something you only learn from books. You learn it by watching the world, reading situations critically, listening carefully. You should always ask, why is this being said now? What's not being said? Who benefits from this statement? What does this silence reveal? Disguise isn't necessarily evil. Sometimes it's necessary. A leader who reveals all their plans puts their strategy at risk. A negotiator who shows all their limits loses leverage. Machiavelli knew that, so he teaches us to be smart with what we reveal and alert to what others are hiding. This isn't about lying. It's about being realistic, about recognizing that the world runs on language games, and if you don't know how to play, you're going to be played. In real life, how many times have we seen leaders say there will be no budget cuts, and then announce harsh reforms just days later? Or companies promise job stability, then lay off workers the next week? The words were used to soften the blow, and those who believed them too much were caught off guard. Machiavelli's political philosophy is uncomfortable because it strips away illusions. It forces us to see things clearly. In the world of power, not everything that sounds sincere actually is. If you don't learn to tell the difference between appearance and intention, you'll always be a pawn, never the one moving the pieces. That's why he said it so bluntly. Princes who trusted too much in the words of others were destroyed. Not because they were betrayed out of malice, but because they refused to see beyond the words. They mistook surface for substance. So, learning to read between the lines is a form of protection. It's how you avoid being tricked. It's how you keep your independence when you hear smooth speeches, easy promises, or weak alliances. It's how you go beyond appearances and train your mind to look deeper. Machiavelli understood, those who read only what's written will always be fooled by those who write with hidden motives. But those who read what's left unsaid gain one of the most powerful tools in politics: clarity. Having lots of friends when you're on top can feel like a blessing. The room is full, the toasts are raised, and smiling faces surround the one in power. But as Machiavelli warned, the real test of loyalty doesn't come during success. It comes when everything falls apart. The Florentine philosopher, with his brutally honest lens, understood that friendship, in politics and in life, often reflects utility. As long as you're useful, as long as you bring benefits, opportunities, or protection, you'll have allies. But once you lose control, status, or influence, many people disappear. Some go silent, others walk away, and in some cases, they even turn against you. Machiavelli didn't condemn this reality. He simply described it. To him, the world isn't built on idealized relationships. It's built on constantly shifting interests. True loyalty exists, yes, but it's rare. More often, loyalty is tied to mutual benefit. And once the benefits are gone, the bond weakens. This harsh view isn't unique to Machiavelli. The Roman historian Tacitus once said, "Nothing is more uncertain than the favor of the crowd, and nothing more insecure than the friendship of those who depend on your power." Praise in times of glory often hides convenience, and behind politeness, there may be calculation. And this applies to all areas of life. How many people stick around while you have something to offer, whether it's influence, status, affection, or money, and vanish when you no longer do? The pain of abandonment isn't just something kings face. It happens among co-workers, longtime friends, even within families. Machiavelli believed a wise ruler shouldn't blindly trust alliances based only on words or appearances. Loyalty must be tested during tough times, because it's in weakness that true bonds are revealed. When things are good, support is easy. But when your world starts falling apart, that's when you find out who's really loyal and who was just there for convenience. This view might feel cold because it goes against our romantic idea of friendship. But understanding this dynamic protects us from deep disappointment and vulnerability. It doesn't mean becoming closed off or cynical. It means becoming more observant, less impulsive, and more prepared. Philosopher Simone Weil, reflecting on suffering and abandonment, once said, "The afflicted have no friends." She recognized that fragility makes people uncomfortable, that suffering often isolates because it reminds others of their own vulnerability. In that sense, walking away from someone in a moment of weakness is often instinctive. People naturally gravitate toward strength, success, and prestige, not toward collapse. But unlike Weil, Machiavelli doesn't approach this from a place of compassion. He sees it through strategy. He suggests that a smart leader should expect abandonment and even plan for it. More than that, he says leaders must build support systems based not just on affection, but on balanced interests. If relationships are based only on emotion, they're fragile. But if they include mutual benefits and stability, loyalty has a better chance of lasting. Take the story of Caesar, for example. When he crossed the Rubicon and challenged the Roman Senate, many who once supported him hesitated. Some followed him. Others waited to see who would win. Loyalty shifted depending on the odds, not out of cowardice, but calculation. Machiavelli saw this not as betrayal, but as part of the game. He didn't expect purity of heart, only that we understand human motives and act accordingly. So what does this mean in everyday life? It means watching closely who stays by your side when you're struggling, who supports you when you have nothing to offer, who listens without expecting something in return. These are the people who deserve your real trust, and they're rare. But even more importantly, it means building relationships based not just on affection or idealism, but on mutual respect, fair exchanges, and solid foundations. When Machiavelli calls politics a game of interests, he's not saying everything is fake. He's saying interest and loyalty can coexist, as long as there's clarity and balance. Blindly trusting sweet words without examining what's behind them is dangerous. If you're in a leadership role, or simply trying to protect yourself in relationships, ask yourself, are these people here for me, or for what I represent right now? And more importantly, if I lost everything today, who would still be around? This reflection isn't just about avoiding betrayal. It's also an invitation to build more honest, lasting relationships. When you stop expecting unconditional loyalty from everyone, you start deeply valuing the few who truly offer it. And that's real power, because a leader who knows their real allies doesn't get blindsided and is much harder to bring down. In short, loyalty should never be assumed. It must be tested. Friends are plentiful when you're powerful. In hard times, they're priceless. Knowing the difference is a key part of mastering life and survival. Wanting to please everyone is understandable. After all, being liked, praised, and socially accepted feeds our ego and gives us a sense of belonging. But Machiavelli, with his brutal clarity, warns us, if you live trying to please everyone, you'll end up pleasing no one, and worse, losing their respect. In politics, leadership, or even personal relationships, constantly trying to satisfy all sides is often seen as weakness. A leader who hesitates, who bows to every criticism, who shapes decisions only to gain approval, is quickly seen as insecure and loses authority. Because respect doesn't come from passivity, it comes from decisiveness. Machiavelli saw this clearly when observing Italian rulers who desperately tried to gain favor from both the masses and the elites. These princes, trying to please everyone, ended up betrayed by both. That's because when a leader refuses to make unpopular choices, they give up their power. They become a slave to other people's expectations. And that kind of submission breeds contempt. There's a paradox here. The more you try to be liked by everyone, the more you lose your identity, your consistency, and your strength. In the end, you even lose the trust of those you wanted to impress. That's because trust is built on clarity. Others may disagree with you, but if they see that you're firm, consistent, and grounded, that earns respect. On the other hand, trying to be everything for everyone creates nothing but doubt. This idea, so clear in Machiavelli's work, appears in other philosophical traditions too. Confucius, for example, said, "The one who tries to please everyone remains true to no one, not even himself." And that's key. Strong character and real leadership requires making choices. And making a choice always means disappointing someone. There's no leadership without conflict, no real decision without the risk of rejection. And that's where many people fall short. They want to be seen as good, kind, and fair by everyone. But they forget that being truly fair often means upsetting those who benefit from injustice. Being ethical means going against certain interests. Being firm means standing up to expectations you can't and shouldn't meet. Machiavelli makes it clear. The right decision isn't always the popular one. It's the necessary one. The most effective leaders are those who don't fear being disliked when they know the decision is strategic, functional, and ultimately for the greater good, even if it's unpopular in the short term. This also applies to anyone in a leadership role, from managers to parents. Real authority doesn't come from being constantly nice. It comes from integrity. If you say yes all the time, your word loses weight. If you never say no, you're not admired for being kind. You're taken advantage of for being predictable. And let's be clear, disappointing people doesn't mean being cruel, rude, or inflexible. It means having the strength to go against expectations when they clash with your principles, your responsibilities, or your strategy. It means being willing to carry the emotional weight of doing what's right, even when it costs you praise. The courage to disappoint is often a sign of maturity. It shows you've moved past superficial acceptance and are aiming for deeper respect. And that kind of respect, even if it doesn't come with applause, is far more stable because it's built on recognition of your strength and integrity. Even Immanuel Kant, who had a stricter moral view than Machiavelli, understood this. In his Ethics, he said, "Act only according to that maxim which you can at the same time will to become a universal law." And that means acting from duty, often means going against convenience, popular opinion, and even your own comfort. Doing the right thing is rarely popular. Virtue isn't always charming. Machiavelli didn't talk about duty in the moral sense. He focused on political functionality. But the conclusion is similar. Sometimes being loved is a luxury that a responsible leader, or any responsible person, simply can't afford. And that's the essence of Machiavellian wisdom. It's better to be respected than to be loved, if you can't be both. Because respect protects you. Superficial admiration fades at the first disagreement, but respect remains, even when people disagree with you. So here's something to think about. How many times have you held back from doing what's right just to avoid upsetting someone? How often have you given in out of fear of rejection? And in the end, did people admire you more or see you as weak? Machiavelli teaches us that instead of fearing conflict, we should embrace the discomfort that comes with making firm decisions. Trying to please everyone isn't kindness, it's hidden insecurity, and people can feel it. They can tell when you're not taking a stand. They notice when you hesitate, and more than anything, they lose respect. Because respect comes from having the courage to be unpopular when integrity demands it. So, the message is clear. If you try to be liked by everyone, you'll end up being respected by no one. It's better to be clear than to be nice. Better to be firm than to be harmless. Because in the end, the world listens to those who have the courage to say what needs to be said, even when it costs them applause. When morality becomes too rigid, it can make us blind. It can cause us to ignore what's truly at stake or hesitate to make necessary decisions just because the path feels harsh. That's exactly what Machiavelli warns us about, with brutal honesty. In many situations, what really matters is the outcome, not the path that led there. This lesson is probably one of the most controversial and misunderstood in his philosophy. It doesn't mean the ends always justify the means, as people often say in an oversimplified and misleading way. What Machiavelli actually proposes is more subtle and deeper. In certain circumstances, being stuck in moral judgment about the means can stop us from reaching a necessary and just end. What do you do when you're responsible for protecting many people, but doing so requires an unpopular, tough, or morally grey action? When you're in a position of leadership, it's not just about your intentions, it's about the real-life consequences. And often, the decision has to be based on what actually works, not on some ideal of what's pure. Machiavelli wrote The Prince during a time of political chaos, betrayal, wars, and power struggles between city-states. He watched virtuous leaders fall because they were afraid to act decisively, worried about staining their moral image. His answer: politics isn't the place for absolute morality. It's the arena of effectiveness. That doesn't mean abandoning all principles. It means understanding that sometimes the right decision may not look morally perfect, but it's the most effective one. This stands in sharp contrast to philosophers like Immanuel Kant, who believed morality should be universal, unconditional, and based on duty. For Kant, lying is always wrong, even if it's to protect someone. Machiavelli would say, it depends. If a lie saves a city, protects innocent people, or prevents total collapse, then maybe it's not just acceptable, maybe it's necessary. This is the core of the tension. between a morality focused on universal principles and a realism that looks at circumstances, context, and the real-world impact of actions. Picture a leader faced with two choices: make a tough call that causes some immediate harm but saves the bigger picture, or wait for a more ethical option and risk losing everything. What's more just? Keeping your hands clean, or protecting as many lives as possible, even at a painful cost? Machiavelli's answer is clear. It's not about doing harm for its own sake. It's about accepting that sometimes being harsh is the only way to avoid something worse. Judging those decisions only by the method is unfair. You have to look at the outcome. This idea applies to everyday life too. How many times do we hold back from acting because we're afraid of seeming harsh? How often do we cling to an image of being good, even when that hurts us or others? How often do we judge other people's decisions by the method they used without looking at the real result? Machiavelli invites us to have the courage to look beyond surface-level morality, the courage to ask, what was the real alternative? What result was achieved? Who was protected by that difficult choice? Of course, this doesn't give anyone a free pass to be cruel. Machiavellian ethics isn't an excuse for brutality. In fact, it demands more responsibility. If you act for a greater good, you have to fully carry the weight of that choice. A leader who sacrifices something for a bigger cause must be ready to own it, and can't use that as an excuse for abuse. John Stuart Mill, the utilitarian philosopher, echoed this view when he said, "The morality of an action depends on its consequences." That's close to Machiavelli's thinking. An action can only be judged fairly by what it actually leads to. This changes how we think about right and wrong. It helps us see that doing good sometimes means getting your hands dirty. That real responsibility isn't about blindly following moral rules. It's about having the clarity to evaluate the actual impact of your choices. That might sound cold, but it's deeply practical and deeply human, because the real world rarely gives us perfect choices. Most of the time, we're stuck in grey zones, faced with tough decisions where every option comes with consequences. In those moments, the standard can't be moral purity. It has to be effectiveness, the result, and the justice that's achieved in the end. Maybe that's why so many people struggle with Machiavelli. He forces us out of our comfort zone. He makes us see that sometimes we judge things not because we're truly just, but because we want to avoid facing the messiness of the real world. It's easier to point fingers at someone's methods than to honestly examine the results they got. Machiavelli teaches us that leading, deciding, and choosing with clarity takes maturity, the kind that can handle imperfection. In the end, the most honest judgment of your actions isn't about how good you looked, but about what impact you actually had on the world. In life, just like in politics, it's not always the strongest or the most virtuous who win, but the ones who adapt. That's the core of Machiavelli's 10th lesson. The world is constantly changing, and those who cling to old formulas, rigid rules, or outdated ways of doing things are setting themselves up for failure. To him, success isn't just about luck. It's about knowing how to use luck when it shows up. That's why he describes fortune as a woman, unpredictable, impulsive, and favoring those who take bold action, those who don't hesitate to seize her with confidence when the moment comes. This provocative metaphor, classic Machiavelli, holds a deeper truth. Fortune, meaning chance, context, the historical moment, can be on your side or not, but it always shifts, and only those who shift with it survive. Machiavelli saw many leaders fail not because they lacked skill, but because they didn't know when to change course. Some were cautious when the moment called for boldness. Others acted recklessly when the situation needed patience. In that sense, rigidity is poison. If you can't adjust to the music, you lose the rhythm and the crown. This idea echoes other thinkers as well. Heraclitus in ancient Greece said everything flows, and that the only constant is change. No one steps into the same river twice, because both the river and the person have changed. Centuries later, Machiavelli brought that same wisdom into the world of politics and action. If the times change, you must change too. What's considered a virtue today could be tomorrow's mistake. Many powerful men and women fell because they relied too heavily on strategies that worked in the past. They assumed that what once brought victory would always work. They ignored the signs of change. They held on tightly to the same tactics that made them great, but now made them irrelevant. And that's a common trap. When something works, we tend to repeat it. But what Machiavelli shows us is that yesterday's success can become tomorrow's prison. The refusal to change is a slow form of defeat. Adapting isn't about betraying your principles. It's about understanding that principles only survive when they're flexible enough to move with the winds of time. Fortune, that force we can't fully control, is like a flood. When it comes, it crashes through everything. Those who try to resist it get swept away. But those who build levees and channels, who anticipate and act with intelligence, can redirect the flow and ride the wave. Machiavelli wasn't a believer in waiting around. He believed in action, in control, in movement. And this lesson applies to all of us, in every area of life: work, relationships, personal projects, how we deal with the world. Reality changes, society changes, people change, and if you don't keep up, you get left behind. It doesn't matter how talented you are, or how much you've already achieved. If you cling to what used to work, the times will move on without you. But be careful. Adapting doesn't mean bending to every passing trend. It's not about abandoning everything for convenience. It's about having the wisdom to know what's essential and what's not. It's about holding on to your core values, but knowing how to change your approach. Because being firm isn't the same as being rigid. It's about resilience. Hannah Arendt, analyzing political collapse in the 20th century, also saw the power of taking action in times of change. To her, humans aren't completely powerless in the face of history. We can act, start over, reinvent, but only if we stay awake to what's happening around us. Only if we read the signs of the times with courage. And Machiavelli goes even further. Fortune favors the bold, the ones who don't wait too long, the ones who don't freeze in hesitation. Because luck, like opportunity, visits everyone. But it only stays with those brave enough to act when the moment calls for it. How many times have we missed out on something because of fear, hesitation, or attachment to an outdated version of ourselves? How often do we cling to systems that no longer serve us, just because we're afraid to let go? Machiavelli gives us a clear message. Don't be a prisoner of your past. Be the master of your present. And here's the key insight. Adapting is also a form of power. Not the power to dominate others, but the power to stay relevant, to stay alive, to avoid being swallowed by inevitable cycles of change. Think about the big turning points in your life, the good choices you made. Many of them probably happened because you were willing to change at the right time, to leave your comfort zone, to try a new path. Now ask yourself, what area of your life are you stuck in? What are you trying to repeat that just doesn't work anymore? Machiavelli would say, if fortune isn't on your side, maybe it's because you're fighting against it, instead of trying to understand it. So change, adjust, take the risk, because time doesn't wait for anyone, and if you don't change with it, you'll fall with it. Words can be seductive. They're light, they fly easily, they charm, inspire, and deceive. But as Machiavelli pointed out, power, and especially security, isn't built on empty promises. The world is full of leaders, allies, and even friends who talk big, make grand promises, and deliver little to nothing. In The Prince, Machiavelli warns us about a common mistake made by rulers and citizens alike, trusting what people say more than what they actually do. Grand promises without real guarantees are everywhere, in politics, in business, and in our personal lives. And yet, people still fall for them. Why? Because it's easier to believe in hope than to face harsh reality. Machiavelli made it clear, princes who trusted words too much ended up destroyed. The lesson? Don't judge intentions, judge track records. Don't evaluate a plan or a partnership based on what's being said, but on what can actually be backed up with action, resources, and real commitment. This idea, separating talk from action, isn't new. Back in ancient Greece, Socrates already made a distinction between rhetoric and truth. He believed words should serve the pursuit of wisdom, but distrusted those who used them only to persuade without substance. His main targets? The sophists, masters of persuasion without any real concern for truth. Machiavelli updates this same criticism. In politics, if you fall for sweet talk without real backing, you're setting yourself up for failure. Speech is a powerful tool, and that's exactly why it can be used as a mask. How many fiery speeches have you heard that were just for show? How many promises of loyalty, change, or cooperation that never left the paper? Words are cheap by nature. That's why they should only be taken seriously when backed by concrete actions. Machiavelli isn't against using words strategically. In fact, he embraces it. He knew that sometimes you need to appear virtuous, brave, or committed. But he also teaches that for those who are truly paying attention, there's always a way to tell the difference between someone who speaks to manipulate and someone who speaks to deliver. The key is observation. What has this person or institution done in the past? Do they follow through? Do they have the means to do what they say? Are they taking any risks or just tossing around empty promises? Real commitment takes action, and action requires sacrifice, strategy, and preparation. If someone promises too much without showing how they'll deliver, they're probably more interested in emotionally controlling you than actually getting results. This lesson is especially important during tough times, when we're more vulnerable to hope. The more desperate we are, the more likely we are to believe in savior promises. That's when critical thinking matters most. Anyone offering an easy fix for a complicated problem is likely hiding something. Philosopher Simone de Beauvoir once said that words can be like weapons, and when they're used without responsibility, they become tools of control. Machiavelli, less concerned with ideals and more with reality, would agree. Language is a battlefield. If you don't know how to see past the promises, you're going to be manipulated. And this doesn't just apply to politics. It shows up everywhere. At work, bosses who promise promotions and growth without backing it up. In relationships, partners who talk about forever but disappear when things get tough. In business, partners who promise big profits but never show the real numbers. The pattern repeats itself. Sweet talk, covering up questionable or even empty intentions. That's why Machiavelli tells us to stay sharp. It's not enough to just listen. You have to ask questions. Where's the proof? What are the risks? What does this person gain if I believe them? And most importantly, what happens if they don't follow through? Making promises is easy. Delivering is hard. And it's in that gap between words and action that the traps of power are laid. Now, this doesn't mean you should be cynical and distrust everything and everyone. It means you should keep a critical, rational, and attentive mindset. If you blindly believe everything you hear, you let your guard down. And when you drop your guard for a promise, you become an easy target. Machiavelli doesn't want us to be cold. He wants us to be clear-eyed, to see past the charm of words and demand action. In a world flooded with speeches, on social media, in marketing, in public relations, this lesson couldn't be more relevant. We're surrounded by beautifully crafted messages that promise it all: change, revolution, success, happiness. But few of those voices have the means or the intention to make it real. So if someone promises you a lot, ask, what are the guarantees? What's the cost, the risk, the actual commitment? And more importantly, what have they already proven they can do? Because in the end, words may be the beginning, but only actions reveal the truth. Machiavelli reminds us that the world doesn't move on intentions. It moves on results. In both life and power, what matters isn't what someone says, it's what they do. And if you don't learn to tell the difference between words and reality, you're bound to be deceived manipulated, or discarded when you're no longer useful. One of the most famous ideas in Machiavelli's work is that a good leader must know how to act both like a lion and like a fox, two animals that represent the two core pillars of effective leadership: strength and cunning. The lion stands for brute power, authority, courage, and the ability to face threats head-on. The fox symbolizes intelligence, cleverness, the ability to deceive, to spot traps, and to escape them with subtlety. For Machiavelli, no leader who wants to survive in the game of power can rely on just one of these traits. And this is where he breaks from the classical political tradition. While many thinkers, like Plato and Aristotle, try to describe the ideal leader as virtuous, just, and rational, Machiavelli takes a more realistic turn. The world doesn't reward virtue alone, it rewards effectiveness. And effectiveness, especially in politics, requires a balance between strength and strategy, between force and deception. A leader who relies only on strength becomes predictable. Courage without intelligence leads to disaster. A lion that roars too loudly draws hunters. On the other hand, a leader who relies only on cunning loses authority. Cleverness without real power becomes fragile. A fox may escape once or twice, but without strength to back it up, it'll be crushed when caught. Machiavelli suggests balance. Be a lion when you must, and a fox when it's smart. Have the strength to intimidate, but also the charm to persuade. Be powerful enough to enforce your will, but wise enough not to need to use force all the time. That delicate dance is the essence of political power, and yes, of manipulation too. Because here's an uncomfortable truth. The same qualities that make a great leader also make a great manipulator. The difference between leadership and manipulation often lies in intention, not in method. And Machiavelli, true to his pragmatic style, isn't overly concerned with that moral distinction. What matters to him is results. A real leader, whether of a country, a company, or even a social group, must be respected and feared when needed. But they also need to know how to hide their cards, read people, play the language game, win others over with words, and retreat strategically. In other words, they must master both strength and appearance. This double skill set requires self-awareness. Knowing when to be intense and when to be subtle demands reading the room, emotional control, patience, and most of all, long-term vision. A leader who always acts like a lion might win quick battles, but lose the war. One who only plays the fox might avoid conflict, but end up eaten by the first real predator. This animal metaphor also invites us to reflect on human nature. Machiavelli believed that most people aren't good by default. They're fickle, self-interested, easy to manipulate. So a leader who trusts too much in people's goodness or exposes themselves hoping for fairness in return is setting themselves up for disappointment. That's why strength, the lion, is necessary to keep order, draw boundaries, and make tough decisions. But cunning, the fox, is essential to stay politically alive, predict betrayal, avoid traps, and slip away when needed. Together, these two traits form the foundation of Machiavellian leadership: realistic, effective, and adaptable. This idea also shows up in other philosophies. Sun Tzu, in The Art of War, said that supreme excellence is not winning every battle, but winning without fighting. That's the fox. He also said that invincibility lies in defense, but victory lies in attack. That's the lion. Even across cultures, true strategic wisdom recognizes the need for both sides of power, and in everyday life. This lesson goes far beyond formal politics. In any area of human interaction, the balance between strength and intelligence matters. In business, in family dynamics, in leadership roles, even in relationships. Those who only impose break things. Those who only yield get dominated. The real skill is acting with firmness without losing your sense, and being strategic without losing respect. It starts with understanding that being good isn't enough. Truth doesn't always win. justice doesn't always prevail. That's why surviving in the real world takes more than good intentions. It takes mastery of both force and finesse. Machiavelli invites us to accept the complexity of power. He doesn't idealize, he analyzes. He doesn't expect perfection, he demands strategy. And when he presents the lion and the fox as symbols of true leadership, he's telling us, don't be limited to one single virtue. Be complete, be versatile, be fierce when needed, and invisible when it's wise. There's something especially dangerous about people who present themselves as defenders of morality while acting in direct contradiction to what they preach. Machiavelli, always focused on the reality behind appearances, teaches us an uncomfortable truth. Hypocrisy isn't always an accident. It's often a tool of power. In a world driven by image, reputation, and messaging, those who know how to play the symbolic game have a huge advantage over those who try to live with consistency. And few tools are more effective than manipulating morality. Publicly condemning what you privately practice allows you to keep your reputation spotless, while secretly enjoying the benefits of the very behavior you denounce. Machiavelli saw this clearly in the religious and political leaders of his time, men who gave fiery speeches against corruption while getting rich through shady deals, princes who spoke out against nepotism but handed out favors to their entire families behind the scenes, authorities who preached virtue in public but negotiated with vice in private. In this context, hypocrisy isn't a character flaw, it's a strategy. And it works because people are often fooled by appearances. As Machiavelli once said, men judge more by what they see than by what they feel. In other words, people trust what they see and hear more than what others actually do. Those who master the moral narrative, those who seem virtuous, gain trust, and with that, they gain power, even, and especially, when their actions contradict their words. This reveals a trap. Hypocrites are often the ones who most loudly demand virtue from others. But that demand doesn't usually come from a genuine moral commitment. It comes from a desire for control. When someone publicly condemns a vice, whether it's greed, vanity, selfishness, or corruption, they create a moral stage where they can appear superior. Meanwhile, by secretly indulging in that same vice, they enjoy its benefits without being questioned. This two-faced performance isn't new. In ancient Rome, the playwright Plautus said, "Man is a wolf to man, especially when he wears the skin of a lamb." The greatest danger isn't the wolf that shows its teeth. It's the one pretending to be harmless. In modern philosophy, Jean-Jacques Rousseau also called out the hypocrisy of elites who preached public morality while exploiting the masses. He saw it as a disguised form of control, keeping ordinary people feeling guilty and obedient, while the powerful did whatever they wanted. The message was clear. Excessive moralism from those who benefit from the system is suspicious. As always, Machiavelli goes beyond moral judgment. For him, hypocrisy is a common and effective tool. And because of that, it's dangerous. A clever ruler or leader knows they must appear virtuous, even if they have to act with vice. And those who don't understand this risk trusting the very people who talk the most about ethics, without realizing they're often the first to break them. This lesson is especially important today, when images are built in real time and public judgment never stops. We're surrounded by speeches on social media, in politics, in corporate promises, and many of those speeches wear a cloak of morality while hiding motives of self-promotion or manipulation. Think about how many public figures were once praised as ethical heroes, only to have their contradictions exposed later. That's not a coincidence. It's the result of a culture of appearances. Many people have learned that it's more effective to seem good than to be good, because the world judges fast but investigates slowly. And that's why the ones who scream loudest about vice are often trying to distract from their own involvement in it. This applies to personal relationships too. How often is the strictest, most puritanical person the one hiding the darkest behaviors? Hypocrisy, in this sense, isn't just self-protection, it's a way to manipulate others. By keeping everyone under moral watch, the hypocrite positions themselves as an authority, while avoiding accountability for their own actions. That's why Machiavelli offers us a compass. Pay more attention to actions than words. Be skeptical of over-the-top virtue, of perfect-sounding speeches, of selective outrage. Always ask yourself, who benefits from this message? What does this person gain by being the moral voice? And more importantly, how do they act when no one's watching? The cure for hypocrisy isn't naivety, it's critical thinking. It's having the courage to dig deeper, to look past the surface, to ask uncomfortable questions. Because the truth is often where no one's pointing, and power, as Machiavelli well knew, prefers to operate in the shadows. Hypocrisy will continue to be a powerful weapon because it works. It offers prestige without sacrifice, power without judgment, appearance without cost. But anyone who wants to understand the real game of power needs to build immunity to it, needs to question loud moralists, and needs to develop the habit of watching what people don't say and what they quietly do. In short, trust less in those who shout against vice and more in those who quietly live with virtue. True character doesn't announce itself, it reveals itself over time through consistency and through choices made far from the spotlight. In a world overflowing with speeches, promises, and noise, there's something most people miss: what isn't said. Machiavelli, a master at reading the hidden layers of power, reminds us that silence can speak louder than words, and what someone chooses not to say can reveal just as much as what they do say. In politics, leadership, and even personal relationships, what's left out often says more than what's included. That's why Machiavelli urges us to not just focus on the words, but to pay attention to the pauses, the subtle gestures, the evasive answers, and the topics that get quietly avoided. Power speaks through silence too. A leader who hesitates to explain a decision, an ally who changes the subject when asked about their plans, or a politician who stays quiet during a crisis, they're not being neutral. That silence is part of the message. It's a political move. Machiavelli understood that politics isn't about transparency, it's about knowing how to say things without really saying them, about suggesting without committing, about hiding the truth without technically lying. That's why understanding power means learning to read between the lines, and especially to notice what's been left out on purpose. This idea connects with something philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein once said: "What can be shown cannot be said." His focus wasn't political, but the point still applies. Some of the most important truths aren't spoken. They're revealed in the context, the tone, the silence. In politics, this becomes hidden power. The person who controls what's unsaid controls how things are interpreted. Let's take it into real-life examples. A politician who never says their opponent's name is silently trying to delegitimize them. A government that avoids talking about an economic crisis isn't being neutral, it's shaping the story through omission. In both cases, silence is not a lack of communication, it's strategy. And here's the risk: if you only listen to what's being said, without noticing what's being left out, you're already behind. Because power operates in symbols. A glance that's avoided, a subject changed, a calculated absence at an event. These are all ways of communicating, and if you miss them, you miss the truth. The language of power has layers. There's the surface level, speeches, promises, public statements. But then there's the subtext, which is often more important. And if you can't read those deeper layers, you'll always be at the mercy of those who can. Machiavelli, who wrote for rulers and leaders, knew that sometimes the smartest move was to say less, to stay vague, to leave room for interpretation, to avoid overcommitting. Because while clarity is morally admired, it's often politically dangerous, and power, by nature, needs flexibility. That doesn't mean we should accept manipulative silence. On the contrary, we need to learn how to listen to it. We need to sharpen our awareness so we can pick up on gaps, hesitations, and missing pieces. That's where the real motives usually hide. This applies to personal life too. A partner who avoids talking about the future, a friend who dodges certain topics, a co-worker who always gives roundabout answers. These are all signs. and ignoring them can be dangerous, because what's left unsaid often carries more weight than the words people choose to say. The philosopher Hannah Arendt, reflecting on authoritarian regimes, noted that silence can be a form of either resistance or complicity. In oppressive systems, silence can protect, but it can also enable the oppressor. What matters is context. Why is someone staying silent? What are they avoiding or trying to cause? Machiavelli doesn't moralize silence. He simply sees it as part of the game. He knows that silence can be a weapon or a shield. It can hide betrayal or protect a fragile alliance. It can come from fear, from calculation, or from a deeper plan. And that's why a wise leader or a sharp citizen can't ignore the power of what's left unspoken. To understand this, we need to learn a deeper kind of listening. Not just hearing the words, but noticing the patterns, the shifts, the silences. Power isn't just in fancy speeches, it's in the pauses and the things people carefully avoid saying. And when it comes to power, anything left out is left out for a reason. Nothing's accidental. A name that's never mentioned, a decision with no explanation, a scandal brushed under the rug, a truth postponed. These are all clues, and those who learn to see them start to see the bigger picture. They see the real moves being made, beyond the public show. In an age of constant information, omission becomes more powerful than ever. We're used to focusing on what's said, but we rarely stop to ask what should have been said, but wasn't. That's the question that opens your eyes. That reveals the real game behind the curtain. So, Machiavelli's lesson is simple and deep. Power speaks through words, but it rules through silence. And if you don't learn to hear those silences, you'll keep getting surprised by things you thought you understood. In a world where appearances can be crafted and words rehearsed, real wisdom comes from noticing what's missing. Because in the end, it's those absences that show you where power really lives and where it's heading. Alliances, whether in politics or everyday life, are rarely what they seem. Behind the handshakes, the speeches about cooperation, and the promises of mutual trust lies a truth Machiavelli knew well. Alliances are rarely built on ethics or loyalty. They're built on interests. That might sound cynical, but above all, it's realistic. In The Prince, Machiavelli warns that a ruler who doesn't understand the practical side of alliances risks being used, betrayed, or tossed aside the moment they're no longer useful. In the real world, political and strategic relationships are formed not from moral alignment, but from mutual advantage. You can trust someone as long as both sides are gaining something, but once those benefits disappear, the bond often fades like smoke. That's why anyone who wants to succeed in the game of power, or even in everyday relationships, needs to go beyond appearances. You have to learn to spot the hidden interests that hold each alliance together. Machiavelli saw this clearly while studying the fragile pacts between Italy's city-states. Princes would swear eternal friendship, only to switch sides the moment a better opportunity came along. Partners would promise loyalty until the balance of power shifted. The hard but simple truth: alliances last as long as they serve a purpose. And here's the most sensitive point: confusing alliance with friendship can be a serious mistake. Genuine friendship can develop inside an alliance, but it's rarely the foundation. Alliances are by nature exchanges. Whether spoken or unspoken, they are deals. Ignoring that invites disappointment. Philosopher Thomas Hobbes, in Leviathan, emphasized this same idea. Humans, driven by fear and the desire for power, make agreements not out of kindness, but out of self-interest and self-preservation. The social contract, he argued, exists because people want security, not because they love each other. The same applies to alliances. They're tools for protection, growth, or survival. Knowing this doesn't mean living in constant distrust. It means staying clear-eyed. You can build sincere, lasting, and productive alliances as long as you understand what's really being exchanged, what's at stake, what risks are being taken, and most importantly, What happens when the usefulness ends? This kind of thinking applies just as much to political leaders as it does to regular people in their personal and professional lives. Business partnerships, workplace collaborations, alliances between social groups, they all look like they're built on shared values, but often they're held together by calculation. What do I get out of this? And there's nothing wrong with that, as long as it's honest. The problem comes with naivety. When people believe an alliance is unconditional, when they blindly trust an agreement that is, in reality, temporary, that's when the fall becomes inevitable. Machiavelli teaches that a smart leader always calculates, always investigates, always assumes that the other side is also playing their own game. Every promise of loyalty should be seen through the lens of convenience. If the ally has something to lose by betraying you, the alliance is safer. But if they have nothing to lose, or worse, something to gain, then you need to be extra cautious. This applies to modern politics too. How many political coalitions are formed not out of shared beliefs but out of necessity? How many deals between parties, companies, or leaders are just temporary agreements to defeat a common enemy, share resources, or survive a crisis? And how many of those fall apart the moment interests shift? That teaches us something important. Strong alliances aren't the ones that promise eternal loyalty. They're the ones where all sides understand the real motives and build trust from that understanding. An alliance that's honest about its goals has a better chance of surviving than one that pretends to be idealistic while hiding self-interest behind the scenes. Even in ancient philosophy, Cicero once said, "True friendship exists only when mutual interests are known and shared." In other words, you can't build a solid relationship on feelings alone. You need to recognize the mutual benefits, the risks, and the limits. That's the foundation of mature trust, not blind faith. So, before entering an alliance, ask yourself, what are the interests at play? What does the other side really want? What am I offering, and for how long? And most importantly, what happens if I'm no longer useful? These questions don't just protect you, they make alliances stronger because they're built on clarity. Machiavelli isn't against alliances. He just wants us to look beyond the speeches, to tell the difference between promises and actual guarantees, between what seems like shared values and what's really mutual gain. And by doing that, he prepares us for a world where power constantly shifts hands, and where only those who know the ground they're standing on can stay standing. To sum up, don't dismiss alliances, but never forget that almost all of them are built on interests. Very few are truly ethical, and even those need constant attention. Because in the game of power, even the most sincere friendship can be tested, and it will only survive if it's based on more than just words. Some virtues are charming, but also deceiving. Few are as powerful as humility, or rather, the appearance of it. In a world where arrogance pushes people away, modesty draws them in. It gives off a sense of security, simplicity, and humanity. But Machiavelli, with his sharp understanding of human nature, warns us. Even humility can be a mask. Not all modesty is genuine. Sometimes it's carefully staged, a strategic move to lower defenses, gain sympathy, and open doors. The person who presents themselves as small, weak, or even unworthy of power might actually be laying the groundwork to quietly take control. Machiavelli urges us to be skeptical of this performative humility. In The Prince, he doesn't speak directly about modesty as a virtue, but he treats anything that seems overly noble with suspicion. For him, excessive displays of virtue, when timed just right, should raise red flags. Not because virtue itself is bad, but because in the game of power, virtue is often used as bait. False modesty works because it taps into our moral expectations. We're taught to distrust the arrogant, the loud, the self-promoters. That makes us assume the opposite. The humble must be trustworthy. And that's where the real danger lies, because the most subtle form of manipulation is the one that hides behind virtue. Unlike showy behavior, which demands respect through force, Calculated humility builds trust through closeness. It invites, soothes, creates intimacy, and before you even realize it, the one who seemed harmless is now holding power, without raising suspicion, without facing resistance. You can see this strategy everywhere. In politics, leaders who present themselves as just humble servants of the people, while working with ambition and cunning behind the scenes. In business, people who act quiet and low-key, but expertly influence decisions and build alliances. In personal life, individuals who seem fragile or submissive, but use that image to gain emotional, moral, or even financial advantage. The philosopher La Rochefoucauld, famous for his cynical insights on human nature, once said, "Modesty is often just a refined form of vanity." In other words, even pretending to have no ego can be a sophisticated way of feeding one. Why is this so effective? Because humility builds trust, and trust opens doors. The one who seems to want no power is often the first to get it, because no one sees them as a threat. No one suspects the fox dressed as a sheep. Machiavelli isn't saying all humility is fake, but he does warn us. In contexts of competition, influence, or decision-making, excessive humility deserves scrutiny. It might not be a personality trait. It might be a persuasive tool, and like all tools in the power game, it should be analyzed carefully. This kind of strategic suspicion also appears in the political philosophy of Francis Bacon, who said, "Dissimulation is like a shadow. It follows everyone who approaches the light of power." Those who seek power rarely announce it openly. They prefer to move quietly, stay on the sidelines, until it's too late to stop them. The danger of false modesty is that it builds a kind of moral shield. If someone dares to question or doubt a person who seems humble, they risk being seen as mean, unfair, or jealous. That's why the strategy works so well. It flips the logic of suspicion. Arrogance raises red flags, but excessive modesty lowers them. So how do you protect yourself? The key is observation. Real humility shows up in consistent behavior over time. It doesn't need to be announced or performed. You'll see it in quiet actions, steady gestures, and honest recognition of real limits, not just words. False humility, on the other hand, feels like a performance. It's repetitive, perfectly timed, and often appears right when there's something to gain. You also have to ask the crucial question Machiavelli taught us to always ask: who benefits from this? What might someone gain by making themselves look weak or insignificant? Are they trying to avoid attention, gain sympathy, escape confrontation? Honest answers to these questions often reveal more than someone's words. At its core, this is the same warning that runs through all of Machiavelli's work. Don't trust appearances. Power doesn't only come from speeches or brute strength, it also comes from subtle gestures, controlled images, and emotional tactics. And among these, few are as effective as the carefully crafted show of humility. In a world where being and appearing to be are often confused, this lesson is more important than ever. Sometimes, the person who seems to be backing off is just gaining ground. The one who looks weak is actually building trust. The one who plays small is just waiting for the right moment to grow and take over. So be compassionate, but not blind. Recognize genuine virtue, but question the kind that feels staged. Because in the real world, modesty can be a virtue, or it can be a mask. And knowing the difference is what separates those who see clearly from those who get played. Few of Machiavelli's phrases have caused as much discomfort and debate as this one. It sounds cold, even cruel, but to understand it, you have to go beyond the surface and look at the context in which it was written. Machiavelli wasn't writing a guide on virtue. He was writing a treatise on power, survival, and effectiveness. And in the real world he describes, fear proves to be more reliable than love. Why? Because love is fickle, unstable, and conditional. People love you as long as you benefit them, represent their interests, or meet their expectations. But the moment you go against their desires, disappoint them, or fail in any way, that love can quickly turn into disappointment, distance, or even hate. Fear, on the other hand, has a sturdier foundation. It's rooted in self-preservation, and because of that, it's less affected by emotional ups and downs. Machiavelli doesn't say rulers should lead by fear alone. He's clear. The ideal is to be both loved and feared. But if you have to choose, fear is the strategic choice, because fear ensures obedience even when affection fades. This idea feels harsh because we're used to thinking about leadership and relationships in general as things guided by empathy, kindness, and emotional connection. And in many situations, that does work. But Machiavelli forces us to confront the raw truth. When power is at stake, relying only on love can be naive. A leader who tries to please everyone and be loved by all risks, hesitating in tough decisions, avoiding conflict, and losing authority. A leader who is respected, and yes, feared within reason, can maintain their position even when they have to make unpopular moves. Fear, when managed wisely, brings stability. This is not a defense of tyranny. Machiavelli warns that rulers should avoid being hated. Hatred is destructive, it leads to revolt. Effective fear isn't terror, it's firm respect. It's the sense that some boundaries shouldn't be crossed. It's the presence of an authority figure who sets clear limits. To him, that's more effective than a leader who relies on people's goodwill to stay in power. The philosopher Thomas Hobbes, in Leviathan, also acknowledged the role of fear in building order. To him, humans in their natural state live in conflict, and it's the fear of death that pushes them to create a social contract. Like Machiavelli, Hobbes saw fear as a civilizing force, not just a tool of oppression. This logic plays out clearly in politics. Governments that depend solely on a leader's charisma, without strong systems of authority, tend to fall apart when that charm fades. But those that know how to use fear wisely, by building respect, setting limits, and making consequences clear, can maintain order even during chaos. And this lesson goes beyond politics. In the workplace, for example, managers who focus only on being liked often lose control, become too lenient, and struggle with authority. But those who command respect, not by being harsh, but by being clear and firm, are usually taken more seriously and challenged less destructively. Even in personal relationships, this principle applies. It's not about instilling literal fear, but about not relying solely on affection to maintain your place or your worth. Being loved is great, but being respected is essential. And respect often comes from showing that you have boundaries, values, and won't compromise at any cost. Machiavelli knew that love is a spontaneous emotion, but it can vanish. Fear, on the other hand, can be built as a protective structure. A leader who is loved but weak might be abandoned when circumstances change. But a leader who is feared and fair is more likely to endure. Of course, there's a risk, going too far. If fear turns into cruelty, it becomes tyranny. The line between respect and terror is thin. Machiavelli knew this. That's why he added, "The prince must make himself feared in such a way that if he is not loved, at least he is not hated." The key is balance, commanding respect, asserting authority, but never crossing the line into resentment. It's a hard lesson to swallow because it requires emotional maturity. It means recognizing that not all relationships are based on pure love. Many last because of utility, habit, or fear of loss. And yet, Machiavelli urges us to approach this reality with intelligence, not despair. True power for him isn't about being adored, it's about being stable. And stability rarely comes from emotional dependency. It comes from strength, from consistency, from control, and yes, from a degree of fear, understood not as oppression, but as boundary. So, if you lead, influence, or want to maintain your space in a competitive world, the lesson is clear. Don't build your strength only on the love of others. That love may be real, but it can vanish. Sustained respect, even when mixed with fear, tends to last. In a world where emotions are unpredictable, Machiavelli reminds us that fear, when used wisely, is a more solid anchor than love. And if you ever have to choose between being liked or being respected, always choose what helps you last. Kindness is one of the most admired virtues in any culture. Being seen as a good, generous, kind, and understanding person is highly valued. But as Machiavelli warned us, not everything that looks virtuous actually is. When it comes to power, influence, and manipulation, kindness can be a shield or a trap. Someone who acts overly nice may be doing more than showing virtue. They might be carefully building an image meant to look harmless, trustworthy, and beyond reproach. Precisely so, they can operate without raising suspicion. Machiavelli, always focused on the gap between appearance and reality, makes it clear. People judge more by what they see than what they experience. In other words, we trust appearances more than actions. And it's this shallow judgment that allows some people to use kindness as a disguise, gaining trust, manipulating situations, and quietly pushing their own hidden agendas. Real kindness doesn't need to be flashy. It's calm, balanced, and steady. But exaggerated kindness, forced, loud, and repeated like a mantra, is often a red flag. It serves to shut down people's critical thinking. It creates a kind of moral shield. Who would dare question someone so sweet, so generous, so good? That's where the danger is. Manipulators know the best way to act without being questioned is to seem above suspicion. They speak the language of empathy, selflessness, and care. But their actions, if you look closely, often tell a different story. It's not really about helping others. It's about gaining control. Not about compassion, but about acquiring symbolic power. This isn't a call for paranoia, it's a call for clarity. In The Prince, Machiavelli explains that seeming virtuous is a survival tool in politics. A leader needs to maintain the image of integrity, even when making tough or controversial decisions. And if this applies to politics, it applies to everyday life too. People who want to manipulate others learn fast. The best way to dominate is to seem harmless. French philosopher La Rochefoucauld once said, "Hypocrisy is the tribute that vice pays to virtue." In other words, those who want to do harm often wear the mask of goodness, not out of respect for morality, but out of convenience. And that mask is often made of fake kindness. How many times have you seen someone act generous just to stay in control? Someone who uses kindness as emotional currency. Someone who claims to have good intentions, but always ends up at the center of power and decisions. Manipulation through kindness is often more effective than through force, because it doesn't trigger immediate resistance. The too nice person can be dangerous because they hide where no one's looking. They don't push with force or argue loudly. They get close, offer support, protect, and gain your trust. But before you realize it, you're caught in a web of obligations, dependence, and guilt they've been weaving all along. And here's something important. This strategy isn't always intentional. Some people truly believe they're doing good, even while they're manipulating. They create a character of goodness not just for others, but for themselves. But Machiavelli, ever practical, doesn't focus on intention. He focuses on results. And if the result is control, dependence, or imbalance, we need to question where that kindness is really coming from. True goodness doesn't trap people. It doesn't demand constant praise. It doesn't smother with sweet gestures. It's honest, direct, and free of calculation. Manipulative kindness, on the other hand, comes with too many smiles, too many favors, too many gifts, and silent expectations that build over time. Philosopher Kierkegaard also warned about socially performed kindness. For him, real ethics are born from an inner struggle, from the tension between who we are and who we strive to be. That kind of ethics doesn't need a show. It's personal. The opposite, theatrical kindness, is a way of lying to ourselves and to others. So how can you tell the difference between real and calculated kindness? Real kindness holds up even when no one's watching. Fake kindness needs an audience. Real kindness is strong but freeing. Fake kindness traps you with sweetness. Real kindness respects boundaries. Fake kindness ignores them, always in the name of some greater good. Machiavelli teaches that in times of conflict or competition, the appearance of kindness can be one of the most dangerous weapons. Because while you feel safe next to someone who seems perfect, you might be getting manipulated without realizing it. And by the time you do, the trap is already shut. The lesson is clear. Don't confuse kindness with innocence, or goodness with a lack of ambition. Watch closely. Judge people by their actions, not just their words. Look beneath the constant smile. Ask yourself, does this kindness give me freedom, or does it make me feel like I owe something? Not every wolf growls. Some whisper. Not every manipulator shouts. Some offer help. And not every ambitious person pushes hard. Some act small, sweet, and harmless, until they become impossible to live without. Fear is one of the most basic and powerful emotions in human experience. It protects us from danger, alerts us to threats, and often drives our actions more than love, desire, or reason. Machiavelli understood this deeply. In The Prince, he clearly shows that anyone who learns to control the fear of others also gains control over their actions. This idea, though uncomfortable, is brutally real. Fear shapes behavior, decisions, and even values. And anyone who knows how to manipulate that fear, whether it's a ruler, a leader, a group, or an institution, can steer the course of events without ever having to use brute force. Think about how fear works. It paralyzes us when we sense we might lose something. It might be fear of losing life, status, a job, social approval, freedom, or identity. And the deeper the fear, the easier it becomes to control the behavior of the one who's afraid. Machiavelli didn't see fear as something inherently bad, but rather as a political tool, one that, in many cases, is more stable than love when it comes to maintaining order. He knew that love depends on the will of others. Fear doesn't. Fear can be imposed. It can be manufactured. And most dangerously, it can be invisible, quietly present, even when everything looks peaceful on the surface. Once you understand this, you start to see the world differently. You notice that many decisions aren't made freely, but out of fear. That many alliances exist not out of connection, but out of self-preservation. That a lot of what looks like logic is actually just a reaction to threat, whether that threat is obvious or hidden. Machiavelli argues that a wise ruler should be feared, so long as he is not hated. Because fear, when used with intelligence, doesn't destroy. It keeps things under control. It creates boundaries. It makes people think twice before they betray, challenge, or disobey. And this doesn't only apply to kingdoms or governments. It applies to any power structure, companies, families, social groups. Fear is often the invisible glue that holds obedience in place. George Orwell in 1984 showed brilliantly how fear can become a permanent system of control. It's not enough to watch people's actions. You need to shape their thoughts. And how is that done? Through fear of punishment, fear of isolation, fear of being rejected. Fear becomes the guardian of total order. The more it is internalized, the more effective and the less visible it becomes. But fear doesn't always need to be loud. Often, it's quiet, emotional, symbolic. Leaders and institutions can manipulate fear without ever raising their voices. They create cultures of guilt, insecurity, and uncertainty. Fear of social judgment, fear of failure, fear of rejection. And through that, they shape people's behavior without seeming controlling at all. That's where control gets sophisticated, when people believe they're making their own choices, but are really just trying to avoid what they fear. Machiavelli knew that fear can be much more effective than direct punishment, because punishment ends, but fear continues. And that makes for a long-lasting form of power. Someone who controls another person's fear doesn't need to micromanage every move. They just plant the idea of a threat, the possibility of loss, pain, or punishment, and people will adjust their behavior on their own. This kind of fear manipulation happens in personal relationships too. A partner who says, "You'll lose me," or "No one else will accept you like I do," is using emotional fear. A boss who hints that one mistake could cost your job. A friend who implies that love or approval depends on obedience. These are all examples of how fear controls choices without looking like oppression. Why is it so effective? Because fear pushes us into self-protection mode. When we're afraid, we rationalize the impossible, accept the unacceptable, and give in where we shouldn't. It creates a subtle but powerful form of control. Philosopher Michel Foucault explored this deeply, showing how modern power doesn't rely on open violence anymore. It works through psychological, social, and symbolic means. Fear of making mistakes, fear of not fitting in, fear of being judged, fear of not being good enough. And with that, people begin to censor themselves, monitor themselves, and act according to a system that doesn't even look oppressive, but is. That's why, according to Machiavelli, the real wisdom isn't just avoiding fear, it's understanding it, knowing when it's leading your actions, recognizing when someone is using your fear against you, asking whether your decisions are made out of conviction or out of fear. And for those in leadership, the question flips. Are you using fear to maintain order or as a weapon to dominate? There's a fine line between authority and tyranny. Machiavelli, while pragmatic, warns that using fear takes skill because too much of it can backfire. In short, whoever controls another person's fear truly controls their choices, not by force, but by shaping the range of possibilities. Fear closes doors, limits options, narrows horizons. That's exactly why it's one of the most effective and dangerous tools in the game of power. So, learn to recognize fear in others and in yourself. Watch who uses it and why. Because misunderstood fear paralyzes, but understood fear can lead to freedom. And true freedom begins when we stop reacting to fear and start choosing with clarity. There's an old piece of wisdom that keeps getting ignored. History is life's greatest teacher. Machiavelli believed this deeply. For him, the past isn't just a collection of facts, it's a map of human behavior. And if you don't study that map, you risk getting lost in the same desert all over again. By looking at the actions of rulers, the rise and fall of empires, and the same mistakes made by different civilizations, Machiavelli saw something essential. Times change, but human nature doesn't. People still crave power, seek safety, fear the unknown, act impulsively, and often forget the lessons learned through suffering. That's why the same errors keep happening. That's why history is more of a mirror than a ladder. In his discourses on the first decade of Titus Livius, Machiavelli treats ancient Rome like a political laboratory, not out of nostalgia or blind admiration, but to draw real lessons. Rome dealt with betrayal, internal conflict, corruption, foreign wars, and even after moments of glory, it collapsed under the weight of its own repeated failures. He concluded that the mistakes we don't fully understand are bound to happen again. And what causes this repetition? Forgetfulness. Each new generation grows up believing they live in a completely new era. They think today's challenges are brand new, that their solutions are revolutionary, and that past failures were due to ignorance or outdated technology. But they forget that behind every system is the same constant, the human being, with the same desires, fears, egos, and ambitions. Not knowing history isn't just an intellectual weakness, it's a political vulnerability. If you don't know how past cycles worked, you're easier to manipulate today. How many times have authoritarian regimes risen under promises of stability? How many economic crashes followed the same patterns of greed and speculation? How many nations have elected charming leaders who turned out to be tyrants, just like before? History isn't just a list of dates, it's a critical lens. And if you don't use it, you're walking in the dark. Ignoring the past creates dangerous illusions in the present. Illusions of progress, illusions of control, illusions of uniqueness. And it's those illusions that make repeated mistakes even more dangerous, because they're disguised as innovation. Philosopher George Santayana famously warned, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." That condemnation isn't mystical, it's structural. Collective amnesia lets old mistakes return in new forms. Worse yet, they get welcomed as solutions. That's why Machiavelli saw studying history as a kind of watchfulness, not to worship the past, but to understand human patterns, to spot the warning signs of decline before it's too late, to resist the temptation of easy answers that have already failed countless times. History is also a defense against naivety. When you know about the fall of Athens, the collapse of Rome, the ruin of Florence, and the rise of empires that thought they'd last forever, it becomes impossible to believe any system is bulletproof, or that any generation is morally superior. Historical humility is the first step toward political clarity. This lesson applies not only to governments but to individuals. How often do we repeat the same mistakes in our personal lives? In relationships, careers, emotional decisions? A person who doesn't reflect on past failures is always just one step away from repeating them. So studying the history of civilizations is also a form of self-understanding. On a larger scale, these repeated mistakes are even more tragic. Wars that could have been avoided, prejudices that come back under new names, extremism that reinvents itself every generation. And all of it happens because we prefer the comfort of ignorance over the pain of awareness. When Machiavelli said that people are prone to repeating mistakes, he wasn't being pessimistic, he was being honest. He was saying, if you want to change the future, start by understanding the past. There is no real progress without memory, no renewal without acknowledgement, no wisdom without history. Studying history is also a form of resistance. In a world where misinformation spreads quickly, knowing the facts, the context, and the patterns that came before is a way to avoid being fooled. Political lies thrive where memory fails. Manipulation gets stronger where there's no reference point. And authoritarianism returns when people forget what it cost last time. History teaches us that no system is immune to collapse, that any society that forgets its mistakes will end up repeating them with confidence. That unchecked power always tends toward abuse, and that people who fall for easy promises often pay dearly for their blind faith. That's why studying the past is more than just an intellectual act. It's a survival skill. It helps you avoid being swept up by ideas that have already destroyed others. It helps you stay awake while everyone else seems hypnotized. Machiavelli left us a clear and necessary warning. Mistakes are repeated not because we lack information, but because we lack critical memory. And that's exactly the role of philosophy, politics, and education, to wake people up before history repeats itself again. In politics, business, or personal relationships, there's a hard truth many people only understand when they've been hurt. Alliances only last as long as there's something in it for both sides. This is one of Machiavelli's most realistic and uncomfortable lessons. When interest fades, loyalty starts to disappear. What once looked like unconditional loyalty often turns out to be just a trade of conveniences. In The Prince, Machiavelli warns us about the deadly mistake of blindly trusting allies who seem to share our ideals or goals. Through countless historical examples, he shows that alliances aren't built on moral affinity, but on calculation. And no matter how solid a partnership may look, if it stops bringing value to both parties, it breaks, or worse, turns into betrayal. Interest is the invisible glue that holds agreements together. When that glue weakens, everything begins to fall apart. Not because people are naturally evil or fake, but because, as Machiavelli put it, human beings act based on usefulness. People stay where there's value. They walk away when there's nothing more to gain. They side with the strongest, the most promising, the most useful, not necessarily the most just. This logic isn't a call for cynicism, but for awareness. You need to understand what really drives an alliance. What does the other person actually gain from you? And what happens if they stop gaining anything? Many leaders make the mistake of thinking loyalty is automatic, or that personal charm is enough to hold alliances together. But Machiavelli knew no bond is safe from disinterest. The philosopher David Hume once said that interest is the biggest driver of human action. Even seemingly selfless acts often carry some kind of benefit, emotional, symbolic, or moral. That backs up Machiavelli's point. Alliances stick when there's something to gain, and they fall apart when there's not. That's why betrayals often don't come out of nowhere. They start the moment someone stops seeing value in the relationship. A partner who starts pulling away, rescheduling meetings, acting indifferent. They've probably already calculated that being around you no longer serves their goals. And when a better opportunity shows up, one that's safer, more profitable, or more powerful, loyalty becomes expendable. Machiavelli says that a wise leader should anticipate this. You need to constantly renew the usefulness of your alliances, not out of manipulation, but out of strategy. Keeping your allies close, valuable, and rewarded is safer than trusting in past gratitude. As he said, people are moved more by the present than by memory. This also helps us adjust our expectations. Hoping for eternal loyalty from someone who gains nothing by staying loyal is a dangerous kind of naivety. Instead, learn to spot the signs of fading interest. Small gestures, delays, subtle changes in tone, all can be signals that the alliance is weakening. This doesn't mean that all human relationships are cold or transactional, but in politics, leadership, and power, blind trust is a luxury few can afford. You have to build systems of mutual interest, ties that benefit both sides, because in the end, it's those ties that hold up against the temptation of betrayal. Historian Edward Gibbon, when analysing the fall of the Roman Empire, pointed out that the loss of interest from external allies, who were once kept loyal through trade and military agreements, contributed to Rome's collapse. When Rome stopped being profitable, it was abandoned by those who had sworn loyalty. A clear example that even greatness can't survive when it's no longer useful. We see this play out today in business and politics all the time. Partnerships between companies, parties, and nations are launched with big promises of unity and cooperation. But behind the scenes, what really keeps them going is shared interest. When one side stops delivering results, the friendship fades, and what looked like a solid alliance turns out to be a temporary deal. So the message is clear. Don't ignore the role of interest in your alliances. Instead of chasing blind loyalty, build sustainable alignment. Instead of demanding faithfulness, give people real reasons to stay. Keep your alliances alive through mutual benefit, whether it's influence, protection, status, or reciprocity. And pay attention to where interests are shifting. Because betrayal usually isn't sudden, it's a process. It begins when usefulness starts to fade, grows as new opportunities appear, and ends with a break. The leader who sees it early can act. The one who stays blind will be caught off guard. As always, Machiavelli isn't asking for purity, but clarity. He knew power isn't held by promises, but by balances of interest. He's not telling us to be cold, but to stop being fooled by the appearance of loyalty. Because where there's no more gain, there's risk. And where there's risk, you need strategy. In the end, interest is the glue of alliances. And like any glue, it has to be maintained. Because once it starts to crack, it's only a matter of time before everything falls apart. We live in a society that talks a lot about justice, but often what we get is just a performance of it. Machiavelli, always focused on real-world politics, not ideal ones, understood that in many cases, looking just is more effective than actually being just. This isn't a celebration of hypocrisy, but a raw observation about how power works. Most people don't see the true nature of actions. They see what's shown to them. That's why leaders, governments, and institutions throughout history have invested so heavily in building a moral image, even while operating behind the scenes with pragmatism, calculation, and sometimes cruelty. The appearance of justice keeps people calm, preserves authority, and avoids pushback. Real justice, if it isn't communicated symbolically, often goes unnoticed or even causes unrest. Machiavelli didn't argue that rulers should be unjust. He argued they should be strategic. He understood that politics isn't about purity, it's about perception. If true justice isn't seen as justice, it loses impact. On the other hand, if a calculated move looks just to the public, it can strengthen power and stability. This distinction between essence and appearance is crucial for understanding political dynamics. And it's not just Machiavelli who made this point. The philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, though a strong advocate for public morality, recognized that public opinion can be manipulated. People often judge based on what they see, not what actually is. In that sense, appearances become tools of legitimacy. This might sound harsh, but think of real-world examples. A government might roll out harsh economic policies that harm the poor, but frame them with talk of social responsibility, inclusion, and the greater good. The messaging sounds just, even if the reality isn't. Politically, what matters is the narrative, not just the numbers. As long as the image of justice is intact, public support can remain strong. The same goes for leaders who commit abuses while maintaining the image of a man of the people, a protector of the humble, or a defender of morality. This symbolic image of justice is so powerful it can shut down criticism and distract from reality. Faced with a convincing performance, people often prefer comforting illusions over uncomfortable truths. Machiavelli knew that people don't judge leaders by their intentions, but by visible results and the symbolic image they present. That's why he famously said a prince should appear to be compassionate, trustworthy, humane, upright, and religious, even if, when necessary, he acts otherwise. Not out of malice, but because in the real world, a moral image is often a stronger shield than pure morality. That doesn't mean we should abandon real justice, but we must understand that it alone doesn't guarantee legitimacy. In today's world of social media and non-stop optics, this lesson is more relevant than ever. Politics is performance, and the stage matters as much as the script. A just action, poorly communicated, can cause backlash. A questionable action, well presented, can win support. Philosopher Hannah Arendt warned about this danger when she described the banality of evil. Evil often doesn't come with a monstrous face. It hides behind normality, legality, and even efficiency. So-called justice that's all show doesn't just confuse people. It normalizes abuse. That's why the appearance of justice can be dangerous. It hides harm behind the mask of virtue. Still, in times of crisis, instability, or war, Machiavelli argued that a leader can't afford to be judged by idealistic standards alone. Their duty is to preserve the state. And that may mean making hard decisions, as long as they look like they're being made justly. People need to believe there's order, principles, and purpose. That belief comes from storytelling, not just facts. So what Machiavelli asks us to recognize is the difference between the political effect of justice and its philosophical essence. Ideally, both should align. A leader should act justly and be seen as just. But when that's not possible, appearance becomes a survival tool. And this is the heart of the tension in this lesson. Power is a balance between substance and image. Being just is a virtue. Appearing just is a necessity. A leader who only focuses on substance may lose public support. One who only focuses on image may lose their moral ground. The real art of leadership is managing both, despite the contradictions. For everyday citizens, this becomes a lesson in vigilance. We shouldn't trust the appearance of justice alone. We need to question, investigate, look beyond the speech. Justice that only exists on the surface serves power, not the people. And when the majority settles for a moral facade, abuse becomes silent and common. Machiavelli reminds us that the appearance of justice can be useful, but also dangerous. It stabilizes, but it hides. It protects, but it deceives. And the true challenge of both leadership and citizenship is knowing when justice is really being served and when it's just being staged. There's a kind of intelligence that doesn't show up on diplomas and doesn't announce itself in grand speeches. It's the intelligence of deception, the quiet power to manipulate, hide, and mislead. Machiavelli understood this perfectly. The more someone gets used to lying, the harder it becomes to predict what they'll do. And that unpredictability is, in itself, a powerful form of control. In The Prince, Machiavelli says that a ruler shouldn't hesitate to use deception if it helps maintain power and stability. But he's also clear, the best deceivers aren't those who lie once in a while. They're the ones who turn deception into a habit. They learn how to control their appearance, their gestures, even their silences, and that makes them dangerously unreadable. Why? Because people naturally look for patterns. We expect consistency, clear signs, something to trust or be suspicious of, but a skilled deceiver breaks that pattern. They bounce between truths and lies, promises and retreats, sweet words and calculated silence. They never fully reveal themselves, and that's exactly why you can never be sure what they're really up to. That unpredictability isn't a flaw, it's a strategy. The master manipulator knows their greatest weapon is keeping you uncertain. While you're still trying to figure out what they really mean, they're already 3 steps ahead. They don't win by force. They win through confusion. Machiavelli said it's essential for a leader to know how to disguise his true nature. Why? So others can't see his next move. In the game of power, being predictable is a weakness. If people can predict you, they can control you. But if you control how people perceive you, changing your behavior with precision, you become slippery, hard to pin down, almost invisible. This kind of subtle manipulation exists at every level of life. Leaders who promise everything, then backtrack with a convincing excuse. Partners who say what you want to hear but follow a hidden agenda. Bosses who act empathetic, only to use the information you share to their advantage. The more someone practices deception, the smoother they get, and the harder it is to catch them. The Spanish philosopher Baltasar Gracian, a sharp observer of human cunning, once said, "A well-executed lie is more powerful than a poorly spoken truth." He believed that the art of hiding is more effective than the art of revealing. The real strategist is the one who stays ambiguous, who speaks in half-truths, leaves room for interpretation, and never fully shows their hand. That's the common trait among great manipulators. They use ambiguity as a tool. They avoid clear positions. They don't make their intentions obvious. They leave you waiting for explanations that never come, while making major moves behind the scenes. They speak little but watch everything. They listen closely, but say only what they must, often just enough to make you think what they want you to think. Machiavelli doesn't romanticize this behavior. He presents it as a reality, a fact of power that wise leaders need to recognize. Because the most dangerous thing about a habitual liar isn't just the lie, it's how hard it is to detect. Someone who deceives regularly becomes like a foggy mirror. You look, but don't see. You hear, but don't understand. You feel something is off, but can't explain why. And that wears you down. Living or working with someone like this is exhausting. They confuse and disorient you. And while you're busy trying to figure them out, they're quietly advancing, gathering information, influencing decisions, taking control. That's the power of unpredictability. A true manipulator never reacts the way you expect. They give in when you expect a fight. They withdraw when you expect a confrontation. And that throws people off. It confuses them. Because the power of manipulation often lies in the uncertainty it creates. That's why Machiavelli urges us to watch not just what people do, but whether they show consistent patterns, or more importantly, if they don't. People who change their mind easily, contradict themselves without shame, avoid clear opinions, and always seem to be on the right side at the right time, are usually playing a deeper game. A game where truth is just one tool among many, and appearance matters more than substance. But there is a defense: critical awareness, the habit of questioning, the courage to look past smooth words, the constant effort to ask, what does this person gain by doing this? Because, as we've seen, someone who benefits from deception rarely has any interest in being transparent. Deception is like fog. It covers the ground, distorts shapes, blurs your senses. And the more someone practices it, the more natural it becomes. Skilled manipulators don't need to act. They become the ambiguity. They become the mystery. And that makes it hard to suspect them, even when the signs are obvious. Machiavelli knew that in the real world, truth is often fragile when faced with the habit of deception. True power, quiet, lasting, effective, often belongs to the person no one can fully figure out. So the lesson here is tough but important. The more someone practices deception, the harder it is to catch them. Habit builds fluency. Fluency builds trust. And misplaced trust protects the deceiver from being exposed. The master of deception has one major advantage: unpredictability. And your best defense is critical thinking. Because only those who learn to read beyond the words, beyond the gestures, beyond the surface, can truly avoid being fooled. One of Machiavelli's clearest lessons is this: in the world of power, being predictable makes you vulnerable. Leaders, rulers, strategists, anyone in a position of influence need to develop a habit of cunning, and with it, the ability to surprise. Because once people know exactly how you'll act, they start planning how to take you down. Predictability is a form of exposure. It gives away your next move before you even make it. It turns your strength into routine, your thinking into a visible map, your strategy into a script everyone can read. And in politics, business, or any human relationship, whoever's script is out in the open is always at the mercy of someone who wants to rewrite it. Machiavelli knew that power isn't preserved just through strength or morality. It also depends on mystery. He used the symbols of the lion and the fox to represent the balance between force and cleverness. A lion on its own can be hunted easily if it always attacks the same way. But the fox confuses, hides, changes paths. That's how it survives. Predictability makes a leader boring, easy to read, and limited in their options. Surprise, on the other hand, throws off opponents, disrupts their plans, and delays their attacks. Being unpredictable means not letting others feel sure of your next move, and in unstable environments, that's a form of protection. In power games, people who always react the same way become predictable, even in their mistakes. If someone always responds the same way to praise, criticism, threats, or pressure, they teach others exactly how to manipulate them. That's one of Machiavelli's key points. The prince should be known by few and understood by even fewer. Chinese thinker Sun Tzu said it best in The Art of War: "Be as unreadable as the night and strike like lightning." Surprise is the heart of victory. A predictable general is already defeated before the battle begins. The same goes for politicians, business leaders, strategists, and even everyday people involved in more subtle power struggles. But what does being unpredictable really mean in practice? It doesn't mean acting randomly or without reason. It means breaking expected patterns when needed, keeping the initiative, and never letting anyone feel fully certain about how you'll respond. It's a kind of psychological control, making the other person hesitate, doubt, second guess. Being unpredictable doesn't mean being unstable. It means being strategic. A good leader can stay true to their principles while being flexible in their methods. They can hold clear values, but change direction depending on the situation. It's tactical unpredictability serving a stable goal. Someone who acts like that earns respect, fear, and becomes hard to take down. Predictability, on the other hand, clears the path for betrayal. It lets enemies, or even fake allies, prepare in advance. They know where you'll step, when you'll give in, how you'll react under pressure. And once everything is calculated, all they have to do is wait for the right moment to strike. Machiavelli warns about this in Discourses on Livy, showing how repeating the same political behaviors led many great leaders to fall. Predictability invites betrayal because it creates safe opportunities. It's easier to defeat someone who never changes than someone who knows how to surprise. This lesson applies to any situation where influence is at play. In the corporate world, for example, predictable managers are easy to manipulate. People know which compliments work, which pressures make them cave, which emotional tactics will get results. It becomes easy to get what you want from them. But a manager who acts with balance, who breaks patterns when needed, who doesn't reveal too much, who surprises others in positive ways or refuses the obvious, earns respect and caution. People think twice before challenging them, because the fear of an unexpected response often stops attacks before they start. The same goes for politics. Leaders who always give in to pressure lose authority, but those who sometimes yield, sometimes resist, sometimes step back, and sometimes strike on purpose, keep control of the narrative. They're hard to read, and because of that, hard to beat. Even the philosopher Montaigne, who was more of an ethical humanist than Machiavelli, admitted, rigid consistency can be a disguised weakness. In other words, there's value in flexibility, and there's wisdom in being unpredictable when necessary. Obvious rigidity invites confrontation. Strategic flexibility prevents it. But be careful. Being unpredictable doesn't mean being fake. It means being flexible with a purpose, not erratic just for show. Fake unpredictability, driven by ego or emotional instability, kills trust. But Machiavellian unpredictability, rooted in intelligence, adaptability, and well-timed surprise, builds respect and lasting power. Real safety, then, doesn't come from rigidity. It comes from surprise. It's not about showing all your cards. It's about hiding just enough to be underestimated, and when it's time to act, doing so with precision at the exact moment no one expects. That's the heart of strategic unpredictability, moving at your own pace while others try to keep up. Let them assume, relax, calculate, and then break the pattern. Because the unexpected doesn't just shake people, it disarms them. Once again, Machiavelli reminds us, be a realist, not a robot. Don't fall into the trap of predictability. It feels safe, but it's deadly. In a world full of power games, the ones who surprise survive. The ones who repeat become targets. Of all the questions you can ask to understand the world and avoid being manipulated by it, few are as powerful as this. Who benefits from this? It's a simple question, but one that unlocks the truth behind speeches, decisions, alliances, and even ideologies. Machiavelli, in his analysis of real politics, didn't believe in selfless actions within the game of power. To him, every decision carries an interest, either visible or hidden. And anyone who wants to survive or even thrive in this game needs to develop the constant habit of analysis. Observe, question, track who gains, who loses, who manipulates, and why. This question cuts through appearances. It peels back the moral coating of speeches. It reveals the calculation behind the words. When a politician passes a new law, who benefits? When a company launches a social campaign, who profits from the image? When an ally shows up at just the right moment, what are they after? To understand that is to see the hidden structure behind the action. Machiavelli knew that words can charm, but it's interests that truly move things forward. That's why he always distrusted noble speeches that didn't match reality. A leader who talks about justice while keeping corrupt allies doesn't care about justice. He cares about maintaining power. A politician who promises change but aligns with old power structures isn't seeking transformation. He's seeking votes, and those who don't see this become pawns. Being aware of this doesn't mean becoming paranoid. It means growing up, because the game of power is built on overlapping interests, and only the naive think everything runs on pure ideals. Most conflicts decisions, and alliances only make sense when you see who's winning from the outcome. Philosopher Francis Bacon once said, "Knowledge is power." And one of the most important forms of knowledge in politics, business, and everyday life is knowing who wants what they're offering, and what they're hiding. That's strategy. That's survival. This lesson applies to both the upper levels of power and everyday relationships. When someone offers help without expecting anything in return, ask questions. When a harsh critique is disguised as advice, ask questions. When someone suddenly becomes supportive in a key moment, ask why. Not all interest is malicious, but every interest shapes intention. Machiavelli understood that people who don't question become tools for those who play the game better. A population that doesn't ask who profits from war, tax hikes, or social cuts ends up supporting decisions that hurt them. An employee who doesn't see the power games in their company becomes a pawn. A citizen who doesn't question the forces behind political narratives becomes an easy target for manipulation and populism. This kind of analysis takes courage, because often it forces us to admit that the things we admire might be strategy, that someone's kindness is actually calculated. That humility is a disguise. That morality is just marketing. But it's also liberating, because once you see the strings behind the curtain, it's much harder to be controlled again. Asking, who benefits from this, doesn't mean rejecting everything people do. It means understanding that behind every move, there's a motive. And if you understand that motive, you can anticipate actions, avoid traps, and build better alliances, because you'll know where everyone is trying to go. Philosopher Antonio Gramsci, who studied systems of power and dominance, also emphasized the need to uncover the interests behind dominant ideas. He believed ideas don't become powerful because they're true. They become powerful because they serve specific groups. And for anyone wanting to resist that control, the first step is to identify the interests keeping those ideas in place. It's important to say interests aren't always selfish. Sometimes a group's interest aligns with the common good, but that's not the point. You'll only know if that's the case if you ask. Only by questioning can you tell who's truly serving the public and who's just promoting themselves. And that questioning starts with habit. Always. It's not enough to listen to a pretty speech. You need to ask, who gains from this message? It's not enough to believe in a promise. You need to see who profits from it being kept or broken. It's not enough to be impressed by someone's actions. You need to observe the timing, the context, the consequences. That's the mindset of someone who wants clarity, not just comfort. Machiavelli gives us here one of the most powerful tools of political philosophy: analytical realism. It's not about rejecting virtue, but about not being fooled by the appearance of it. It's not about distrusting everything, but about realizing the world runs on interests. And ignoring that truth is choosing to walk blindfolded. So next time you face an important decision, an inspiring proposal, or an emotional story, ask yourself, who benefits from this? It may sound like a simple question, but it's a sharp blade. It cuts through illusions. It exposes masks. It reveals motives. And the more often you ask it, the sharper your mind becomes. The harder it is for others to manipulate you. The more of a strategist you become, not out of coldness, but out of clarity. Because as Machiavelli warned, those who can't see the interests of others end up playing against themselves. And if you've made it this far, it means you truly value critical thinking, clarity, and self-awareness, exactly what Machiavelli stood for, seeing the world as it is, not as we wish it were. If these reflections helped you see reality more clearly, go ahead and like this video right now. It shows YouTube that this content matters and helps more people discover this knowledge. Also, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Here, you'll find much more than famous quotes. You'll find deep analysis, applied philosophy, and thinking strategies that can actually make a difference in real life. And of course, share this video with someone who needs to learn how to read the world with more intelligence. A friend, a co-worker, someone looking for emotional maturity or strategic clarity. Sending this could be a gesture of care, and maybe even a wake-up call. Oh, and don't forget to leave a comment below. Which of these 25 lessons hit you the hardest? Which one have you lived through yourself? Let's keep the conversation going. Your comments are fuel for future videos. Finally, stick around the channel. There's already a ton of content here that can help expand your understanding of power, human behavior, ethics, politics, philosophy, and emotional intelligence. One video leads to another, and each one will make you better prepared to navigate the real world with eyes open and mind sharp. Thank you so much for walking this path with me. And remember, those who think aren't easily fooled. See you in the next video.